Welcome to Time Mage by Mark Van Pelt. Time Mage copyright 2018 by Mark Van Pelt. All rights reserved. Dedication for Bridger, Ezra, Trayson, Trevor, Sarah and Michael, inspirers of stories. Time Mage. This was your idea, your plan, now you want to back out. Does your cowardice know no limits? Of course not, I just need to make a few alterations. I'm not like you, I can't simply sit back and watch what I know must happen come to pass. But to do this, to live among them, now as one of them, not even know who you really are. How can you control anything in such a condition? We aren't gods. It shouldn't be left to us to decide who lives and who dies. All the gods have either fled this world or are dead, and neither of us are exactly human anymore. Who else is there? It isn't too late, you can still join us. It would be nice to have someone who actually understands what I am doing. I'm sorry, old friend, I can't be that person. First, I like having a heart that beats and blood that flows. I still have flowing blood. All that flows in you is decomposing filth. Second, as I said, I haven't abandoned the plan. I have to watch over the village. If they are wiped out, if we lose him, I don't know if we can save the future. That can be done without putting yourself in such danger. I still think you are putting the future at risk. Besides, how will you even be able to hide your memories? I didn't know that was in your list of talents. Remember, I've been there, I've seen many possible futures, you haven't. I know what must be done. As far as how to hide my memories, I borrowed a little trinket from Lady Alexia. It will do the job and will wake my memories if I'm in danger. It is the only way I can go through with this, and it might be fun. My first childhood was interrupted by a war. Maybe this one will be better. Very well, I can't stop you. So how is Lady Alexia? Still very much Lady Alexia, which reminds me, she asked me to let you know that the next time she sees you, she will kill you. She can try. Betsam. Down. Betsam dropped to the ground and rolled. He felt the air move as a warhammer passed just above him, right where his head had been a moment before. What was Lloyd trying to do, kill him? This was just a stupid test. An important one, yes, but still a test. Betsam finished his roll and sprang to his feet, facing his attacker. Like him and everyone else in this test, Lloyd was 10 years old. He had a bit more muscle on his arms than Betsam did, due to using that heavy warhammer all the time, and he also wore a determined look on his face that said he wasn't holding back either, he was playing to win. He was also now laughing at him. Why was he laughing? He tried to take a step back, but one of his feet refused to move as if it was tied to the ground. He glanced down and saw an image of a rope attached to the ground at one end that had been drawn with colored sand. At the other end was drawn a manacle with a lock on it. The foot he couldn't move was inside the image of the manacle. He had stepped into a magic trap. Well, if Lloyd and his partner wanted to play rough, then Betsam could give them rough. In his hands he held his chain sickle and threw the curved blade right at Lloyd, who responded by holding out the handle of his hammer to block. If he expected Betsam to stick to attacks he had mastered back when he was still 7, he would soon be disappointed. He whipped his hand holding the handle connected to the sickle by a chain in a circle, creating a wave that traveled up the chain and caused the sickle to suddenly swing under the handle of the hammer, and then back up, wrapping around it several times, leaving a long cut in the front of Lloyd's shirt. Betsam pulled hard on the chain, and the warhammer flew out of Lloyd's hands and right into Betsam's empty outstretched hand. As hard as he could, he pounded the hammer down on the image of the lock and manacle, and felt his foot come free. Then he looked up at his now weaponless opponent. Got him? He thought triumphantly. He was about to gloat about his victory, when he suddenly felt a small blade push up against his neck. It was Rose, Lloyd's partner, and the only girl of their age. He had failed to notice the shadow of a tree right next to him, and she had just stepped out of it. All she had to do with her weapon touching a vital area was declare him to be dead, and he would be out. Taken out by the sharpened handle of a paintbrush at that. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, another form seemed to pop up between them, materializing seemingly out of nothing. A hand from the form shot up and pushed Rose's hand away, and his other hand threw a powder into her face. The newcomer then quickly stepped away, backing up right into Betsam and pushing him away also. The newcomer then threw some powder into Lloyd's face, who was in the act of charging at them. Betsam and his rescuer fell backwards in a heap as both Rose and Lloyd collapsed to the ground. Rose immediately began to snore. Betsam rolled away several feet to make sure none of the powder used on his opponents put him down for a nap. He then stood up. "Snipes, Colton, she almost had me. What took you so long? Where are Arroweye and Toolsomth?" "You're welcome for saving your skin, twice," Colton murmured and then answered. "They walked right into a trap Rose had drawn for them. She almost got me after I told you to duck, but luckily she decided saving her partner was more important. That girl is scary. With Lloyd those two almost had us all." As he finished speaking, a sly grin came on Colton's face, mirrored by the one on Betsam's. "Does that mean we just won?" Betsam's question was interrupted by an adult voice yelling, "Ambush!" "What? Now?" he thought, and then immediately recognized his fatal mistake, as he saw Colton drop to the ground without hesitation, roll into a shadow, and fade out of sight. "I'm such an idiot," Betsam said to himself in his head as he started to follow his friend, but he felt the sting he had been expecting strike his neck, and his last thought was that he was going to get a nap after all. Then everything went dark. Thunk. A strange noise was the first thing Betsam noticed as he began to wake up. He tried to open his eyes to see what the sound was, but immediately regretted it as a huge headache attacked him. He left his eyes closed. Thunk. There it was again. He tried to remember what happened. He felt like he had been hit with one of his shadow arts teacher's sleep darts. Wait, he had been hit by one. He remembered now. He had failed to duck in time after the call of ambush. Thunk. Okay, what was that sound? Betsam forced his eyes open. The sound was starting to resemble the sound of. The first thing he saw was an arrow fly right towards him and slam into the tree he had his back against with a loud thunk less than an inch from his left cheek. He jerked his head to the right only to bump it into several arrows embedded in the tree on that side of his head. In fact, there were arrows all around where his head had been resting. Finally, it's about time you woke up. It's your turn to cook supper, and we're starved. It was Arroweye. He had been shooting arrows all around his head. He was sitting a good 20 feet back. If there had been even a small gust of wind, one of those arrows might have hit him. "Are you nuts? You could have killed me." Betsam trailed off at the end of his statement. There was something wrong with his voice. It didn't sound like him at all. In fact, he sounded like. He looked around and saw everyone was in camp. Colton squatted nearby with his eyes cast down, looking uncomfortable. Everyone else were openly snickering. He finally spotted Rose drawing on a rock on the ground with the brush end of one of her daggers, paintbrushes, trying hard and failing to keep a straight face. He felt a stiffness on his face that told him it was coated in something, most likely some sort of paint. With a sigh, he spoke in what was clearly Rose's voice. "Rose painted a self-portrait of herself on my face, didn't she?" Laughter was his only answer. Every student in his group were magically trained to use magic with their skills and talents. Rose was an artist and had obviously taken advantage of his face while he was asleep. He was about to say something angry that he would most likely have regretted later when another voice spoke, an adult voice. "You should keep the paint on. Maybe Rose too will live longer than Betsam did." It was their teacher, Varley, and he didn't look happy. Actually, he never looked happy. He was always telling them exactly what a bad job they did, especially when they messed up an ambush drill. He continued, "I should dig a grave and mark it. Here lies Betsam, who was too dumb to duck when warned of an ambush." Rose snickered and Varley turned on her. "I wouldn't laugh, Rose. At the time of the ambush not only were you asleep, but your snoring would have ensured both your and Lloyd's death. In fact, Colton was the only one to survive the test. The rest of you are dead." "Only because he hid in the bushes most of the test," Arroweye murmured, while Rose's face turned red with embarrassment over the snoring comment. "We are warriors of the village of the Shadow Hunters. At least you will be if you live long enough. Remember, the shadows are where we belong. Our life is in the shadows." I wouldn't fault Colton for doing what he was trained to do. Now, Rose 2, go wash your face so Betsum can start on supper. Rest of you had best go practice more. And why do I see bags and weapons on the ground? You are to have your equipment with you at all times. The 6 children immediately got up, grabbed any loose equipment, and separated to their different tasks. Arrow-Eye came over to the tree and started removing arrows. Betsum glared at him, which might have made more of an impact had his real face been visible. Don't worry, I only let him use normal arrows. I took away his ice and explosive arrows, Toolsomth, Arrow-Eye's partner, said cheerfully as he passed by. Arrow-Eye's skill was with his bow, and looking at the arrows making a perfect outline of his head on the tree, Betsum had to admit that he was good. In contrast, Toolsomth's skill was in his tools. He made several kinds of arrows for his partner and several other gadgets. Looking around their campsite, a day's hike from their village, he spotted Lloyd watching Colton as he worked on making a fire. Lloyd's specialty was with locks and sealing magic, while Colton was their ranger and naturalist. Betsum was supposed to be their shadow master. While they all had some skills with shadow magic, Betsum was being trained in additional shadow spells and techniques. Betsum went to the stream and washed off the makeup and spell that Rose had put on him. Once he saw his own face reflected in the water, he spoke a few words to himself just to be sure it was back to being his own voice. He got up and headed towards the campfire to start supper, but noticed Rose sitting with her colored sands out making a sand painting. Most of the time she was nice enough but was a force to be reckoned with in combat, not to mention vengeful when she lost. When Betsum had first heard her skill was with art, he figured she would be easy to best. He had been wrong. Not only did she like to show them all up, but she liked to thoroughly embarrass them as she did it. He headed over to her, painting his face like that had just made a humiliating situation even worse. He intended to make sure she understood exactly how he felt about it. Just as he was opening his mouth to speak, he saw what Rose was drawing. It was a map of the forest around the camp. Her fingers moved at an astonishing speed. In an instant she erased a tiny squirrel from one tree and remade it on a nearby branch of another tree. Rose's face was a mask of concentration. Her fingers were magically tracking everything nearby. This was how she and Lloyd had done so well during the test. She had been tracking them all, using magic to guide her hand in changing the drawing as things happened and people moved. Betsum quickly found himself and Rose on the map, along with the other students. He also spotted their teacher moving slowly around the camp. "What's Varley doing?" he asked her. Rose answered without breaking her concentration, "Patrolling." "Wait, I thought he had just got back from a patrol right after I woke up." "He had," Rose said. "I was wondering about it myself, that's why I decided to track him. He must have noticed something that bothered him." Betsum watched a few more moments and, deciding not to start a fight after all, was about to leave when something strange happened. Rose placed her finger in the forest near where their teacher was patrolling and slid it quickly to the pile of sand that showed where Varley was. When Rose lifted her finger, the sand representing their teacher had turned red. Rose gasped. "What? What happened? What does red mean?" Rose's voice trembled as she answered, "It means he's dead." "What? How?" This had to be a trick. She had to be playing a sick trick on him. The stricken look on her face, however, told him she wasn't. Rose's fingers suddenly made 3 new forms in the forest that approached their fallen teacher. "Where did they come from? Who are they?" "I don't know, they must have been magically hidden. They're Shadow Elves." Rose drew a line from the 3 new figures to the outside of the map and drew a circle. Before he could ask what she was doing, her fingers began writing words in the circle in Elvish. "Shoot the healer first, then the archer, kill the rest at your pleasure. On 3. Betsum, you going to start supper anytime soon? We're starving and the sun just set. 1. It was Colton that spoke as he was walking up to them. 2. Healer? Colton, as part of his ranger training, was the only one of them with healing skills. 3. Betsum didn't hesitate this time. He turned to face Colton as his friend stepped next to him, shouted "Ambush" as loud as he could and pushed him away as hard as he could. Betsam felt a sting in his outstretched arm as he dropped to the ground. He saw Colton let himself fall backwards and roll into a shadow where he vanished. Betsam rolled into the shadow of a nearby bush. He immediately felt his connection to the shadow and pulled himself into it. He felt intense cold as he pictured the shadow where he wanted to come to and mentally pulled himself there. He came out of the shadow of a tree at their assembly point. "Rose!" Betsam called out as he stood up. "I'm on it," she answered, and Betsam saw her already drawing a new map on the ground. "Betsam, what are you thinking? Only Varley can do an ambush drill. He's going to break your snipies?" Toolsomth had spoken, but Betsam hardly heard him as he said quickly, "Varley is dead. Shadow Elves." "Betsam, your arm." Lloyd stepped up to him to get his attention. Betsam looked at his arm and was surprised to find an arrow that had passed halfway through it. Only now did he remember the sting right before he had dropped to the ground. Now he was starting to feel the pain, which he immediately tried to push to the side of his mind. He didn't have time for it. "Wait," Colton exclaimed, "was that aimed at me?" "Found them," Rose interrupted. "They are heading right for us. They must be tracking us. They will be on us in about 3 minutes. Betsam immediately turned to Toolsomth. "Decoys." Toolsomth dug into his shoulder bag and brought out 6 small metal objects and passed them out. "Prick your finger and put a drop of blood on it, wind it up and throw it in the air." When he got to Betsam, he hesitated a moment, staring at the arrow, before putting the object against the arrowhead, smearing some blood on it, turned the small crank, and tossed it into the air, where a pair of metal wings sprung out and the device flapped away. "Thanks," Betsam said, realizing he couldn't have done that with one hand. "Okay, everyone, to the next assembly point. Go." Everyone scattered, each to a different shadow, and vanished. Well, nearly everyone. Colton was still standing, just staring at the arrow sticking through Betsam's arm. "Colton, go now, they will be here any second." Colton didn't move, so using his good arm he grabbed his non-responsive friend and pulled him into a shadow, and after a flash of cold pulled him out at the next assembly place. By now he was breathing hard. Moving between shadows took a lot of magic, and he was being drained fast. He saw Rose already making a new map to track the elves, so he did a quick head count. There were only 5 of them, and Arroweye was looking around with increasing panic. "Where is Toolsomth?" No one answered him. Betsam thought back. He had seen Toolsomth go into the shadow. Where had he gone if not to the next assembly point? Then they heard a rumble in the near distance, and immediately afterwards Toolsomth rolled out from the shadow of a bush, his cloak and tunic both on fire. He rolled on the ground to extinguish the flames, while both Arroweye and Lloyd helped by using their own cloaks to smother the flames. "You idiot," Arroweye said as the last flames were put out. "What did you do?" He held up a bag that Betsam recognized as Varley's shoulder bag, and said with a cough, "Thought we might need some of Varley's weapons and other stuff. Didn't realize they set traps till I had already set one off." "Stupid idiot," Arroweye murmured, looking over his partner's burns, and then looking at Colton said, "Hey Ranger boy, you going to snap out of it and help our 2 injured, or are you going to let your partner bleed out?" Colton blinked and seemed to come out of the trance he was in and said, "Oh sorry." Betsam was amazed on how shaken up Colton seemed. Betsam glanced at Rose, who said, "They're chasing one of the decoys, it's okay for now." Colton turned and moved to get hold of the arrow that was still in Betsam's arm when Arroweye told him to wait, and stomped over to them. "Just get your bandage ready. If you try to remove the arrow with those hands shaking like that, you will do more damage to Betsam than the arrow did." Arroweye took hold of the arrow and broke the side of the shaft with the arrowhead as close to his arm as possible, then looking at Colton asked, "Ready?" Colton finished putting a healing paste on a strip of cloth and nodded to Arroweye, who didn't even warn Betsam. He just yanked the remaining part of the arrow out. Blood began flowing heavily from the wound, but Colton quickly pressed the bandage on both sides of the wound. Betsam felt a tingle from the healing paste, and also traces of magic, along with a horrible itch. "Just get his arm usable and then see to Toolsomth," Arroweye said. "So, what are we going to do now?" asked Lloyd. "Try to get back to the village," suggested Toolsomth. "Doubt we could make it. It's too far, and they killed Varley without him even knowing they were there," Rose said. Actually, I think he did know something wasn't right. Why else would he have gone on another patrol right after finishing one? Betsam said. But Rose is right about us never making it. These guys have been doing this since before our great-grandparents were born. Soon enough they will take us seriously and catch up to us. Only reason we're still alive now is Varley's ambush drills. It hit Betsam. He had hated Varley for always being so hard on them, but the very reason they were alive now was because he had pushed them so hard. He had saved their lives and now he was gone and they would never get to thank him. Well, unless they joined him in the next few minutes or hours. Toolsomth, do you have any more decoys? Betsam asked. Just one, it would have been Varley's. Can it fly all the way to the village? Maybe, if I wind it enough and add some magic to it. Attach a short message, explain we were ambushed and need assistance. What are we going to do? Asked Rose. They will track us down. Varley taught us that we can either meet the enemy on their terms or on ours. If we want to survive the night, we better make it on ours. Time to show these Shadow Elves that while they may live in the shadows, we own them. It was completely dark now. Betsam concentrated to use the shadow magic needed to hide him and his friends as the three elves slowly came into view. It was a skill from his shadow mastery. He used magic to pull a shadow over them all, making them appear to be invisible. He heard one of the elves speak, most likely the tracker of the group. I can smell them, they are here. They must be hiding in one of these shadows, one said. Ready to flee again, no doubt. Let them flee, it will use up what shadow magic they have left, soon it will be gone, and they won't be able to run anymore. Search the shadows. The last one to speak sounded like their leader. Betsam tensed as the elvish archer began shooting arrows in the shadows around him as the other elves separated to search others. Their leader was right, his magic was almost completely drained, and using what little he had left to conceal all of them ensured he couldn't save himself by passing through the shadows. When the archer looked right where he and his friends hid and started pulling an arrow back on his string, Betsam knew it was time. So did Arroweye, who released an arrow of his own a moment before Betsam dropped their magic camouflage. The elvish archer released his arrow before he had aimed it at them, and it flew harmlessly into the woods. Meanwhile, Arroweye's arrow flew straight and true, and would have hit the elf in the face if he hadn't used his now free hand to snatch the arrow out of the air. The elf began to say, "Nice try," but was cut off from saying more as the arrow exploded in his hand, forcing him back engulfed in flames. At the same time, Betsam ordered everyone to attack with just one word, move. Each team moved to attack one of the elves. He caught a glimpse of Lloyd and Rose heading toward one elf who was fighting a tree branch painted to look like a fire-breathing dragon, which was in fact breathing fire. Rose's work. As he fought, the elf had to try to free his foot from snares Rose had drawn, but instead of a picture of a lock on the image of the manacle, this time Lloyd had put real locks on the snares, making it all the more difficult to break the magic. Meanwhile, Arroweye and Toolsomth headed to try to finish off the injured archer, who was now moving sluggishly from pain, and from one of Varley's sleep darts he had been hit with after setting off one of Toolsomth's traps. The fact the elf wasn't sleeping and out of the fight worried Betsam. He lost sight of the other battles as he found himself face to face with the apparent leader of the Shadow Elf group. The elf had drawn a sword and looked at Betsam with icy fury. He hadn't expected such a desperate attack from a group of human children. Betsam threw his chained sickle at the elf and gave several tugs on the rod in his left hand to try to maneuver the sickle around the elf. With one of the tugs he felt pain shoot up his injured arm, his earlier injury not liking the sudden movements and resulting in the elf knocking the sickle away effortlessly. He had expected his attack to fail, but was disappointed on how badly it had. He only hoped Colton had had a chance to get into position. A quick glance told him he hadn't. Where was he? Risking a look behind him, he saw his best friend still sitting where he had been hiding a moment ago, hugging his knees and shaking badly with his eyes closed. He had frozen up again, and Betsam realized he had been left to fight an elvish warrior by himself. He turned back to his opponent just in time to see the sword coming at him. He dropped and rolled away, but felt the sword cut through his tunic and a few layers of skin on his back. He felt blood starting to run down his back as he quickly returned to his feet in a defensive position. Betsam desperately looked to see if any of his friends might come to help, but he could see even though they had surprised the elves with their attacks, the elves were quickly turning the tables. Even the injured and drugged archer was now easily holding off Arrow-Eye and Toolsom's attacks. Betsum managed to dodge another sword strike from his enemy, but received a deep cut to one of his legs. That would slow him down, and Betsum realized they had failed. They were all about to die, and he was going to be the first, well, second after Viley. He looked past the elf raising the sword to end his life and saw Colton still sitting the shadow, paralyzed with fear while his friends were about to die. Betsum forgave his friend. It wasn't like he really would have made any difference, they were too outclassed. Then suddenly things got weird. He heard a voice suddenly come to his mind. Order Colton to wake up now. He did as he was told, and saw the strangest thing he had ever seen. Colton's eyes flew open in a shocked expression, and then he was gone. He didn't fade into a shadow, he just blinked out and blinked in between Betsum and the elf. Somehow, he did it without using any shadows. Moving faster than any speed burst Betsum had ever seen, Colton inserted his dagger into the surprised elf's heart, and at the same time pulled the sword out of his hand and flung it at the elf, who was a moment away from killing Rose, impaling him. He then stepped aside of the collapsing elf next to him and raised a hand towards the remaining elf and softly spoke the word slow. The shadow elf began moving very slowly, allowing Arrow-Eye to finally take the archer down with an arrow. Suddenly the forest was quiet. Everyone was now staring at Colton, who stood there looking embarrassed. That and something else, there was a look about him, a deepness to his eyes that Betsum had never seen in all of their lives. After a moment Colton spoke. Look, I know you guys want to know what happened, but you're all hurt. Let me see to your wounds and then I promise to explain everything. Okay Colton, we're healed, now start talking, Rose demanded. Betsum had watched Colton work silently, trying to put together what had happened. He had heard a voice and had felt magic pulled from him when he had commanded Colton to wake up. What had he awoken? Are you Colton? Betsum asked. The hurt look that crossed his friend's face was pure Colton, so he waited for an answer. Yes, it's me, Colton finally answered, but thanks to you I remembered some things that I had forgotten a long time ago. How long ago? A little over 10 years. You were born a little over 10 years ago. What could I have made you remember? Your own burr. No. Colton interrupted with a sudden look of panic. Not that, and please be careful about what you tell people to remember while holding your chain sickle. Some memories are best left forgotten. His chain sickle. It was his sickle that had changed his friend. The voice he had heard of magic items that could speak to the person holding them and give them their power. They were called Fielas. Had his chain sickle been a Fielas all these years? Colton continued explaining, I wasn't born 10 years ago, I was born about 170 years ago, although I am quite a bit older than that. That's impossible, we've been growing up together, we were toddlers together. Yes, that is true, I have been growing up with you, but this isn't the first time I've grown up. Wait. Just listen, hold your questions till I finish, please. I grew up the first time in an orphanage in the old Yucaipan Empire, before the War of Destruction. I had a friend, he was my only friend, and I was his only friend. You see, he was really good at making stories, but was often confused. There was something wrong with his mind, so that his stories seemed real to him. He made this whole play world and let me be part of it, and he eventually learned how to use magic to let me see it also. Then one day the city was attacked, I was 7 at the time and ran back to the orphanage to hide. My friend used his magic to make the invaders see his delusions, and then confused them long enough to save the king and many of the nobles. The chaos he created in the enemy army attracted the attention of Snipes, the god of chaos, who decided to reward him by giving him a large vial of his blood. As you know, the blood of the gods is a powerful source of magic. My friend unleashed this magic and used it to bring his own fantasies to life, which included giving me powers that we had always pretended I had when we played. He gave me the powers of the Time Mage. Wait, Lloyd cut in, wasn't there a Time Mage that helped our ancestors move this village to this continent? Yes, that was me. I've been visiting possible futures, and I knew this village would be important, so I helped Bellinor bring it here during the War of Destruction. Then 10 years ago, I needed to disappear, so I used my time magic to alter my age back to a newborn and used the magic weapon, memory, to block my memories. This must be memory? Betsam asked, holding up his sickle. Yes, Bellinor must have given it to you, in order to spite me, yet make sure it was always near me. Our resident elf was the only one in the village that knows who I am. Wait, Toulson said, what about your parents? They have to know. Betsam saw a pained expression cross Colton's face before he answered, speaking with a quiet voice. They did know. They agreed to be my parents after their real son died in childbirth. They asked to have their memories changed so they would think I was the child they lost. So right now, they don't know, neither did I till Betsam woke my memory. I had always wondered what it would have been like to grow up with parents. Tears were beginning to form in Colton's eyes, when suddenly a look of terror came across his face. Wait, that was a scouting party that attacked us. If they were only spying, then they never would have revealed themselves to us. Their orders were to eliminate us. They would only do that if they were hiding something. Like what? Toulson asked. Rose, Colton called out as he stepped over to where she was tracking everything nearby with her sand drawing. Can you track further east? Rose began to expand her drawing eastward. At first there was nothing, only trees and animals appeared, then some shadow elves appeared and then more still. It's an army. Arroweye exclaimed. Heading right for us and the village. Lloyd added. This isn't right, Thodine, you idiot, what did you do? They weren't supposed to attack for several more years, Colton murmured to himself. Who's Thodine? Betsam asked. He was my partner in making sure we have a future. That stupid Lich Lord war, he was supposed to have stopped it. With the new Ukaipan kingdom so weakened now, the Shadow Elves are feeling brave. We have to turn them away, or the plan will be ruined completely. What plan? Asked Rose. At the beginning of the War of Destruction, when I started visiting possible futures to find one where humans weren't completely wiped out. I found one, but it's a difficult future to bring about. If I fail, then the human race is doomed, but as part of this plan I lost the source of most of my power at the end of the war. So, I need your help to turn back this army. We have to do it. We? Betsam asked. We can't turn back an army, we couldn't even take out 3 of them without you. The village can't fight off an army of that size even if we had more decoys to send them a warning with, and for the record we did beat those scouts, we beat them together. There was a reason I chose to be the same age as all of you. You all have no idea what you can do together. It's time I show you how. Betsam watched as the Shadow Elf army entered the meadow. It felt like he and his friends had been working and preparing for much longer than a single night, yet a glance at the stars showed the night was still young. He suspected that Colton must have been affecting time for them. There was no way they could have set up what they did in just an hour. They had picked the meadow because it would be the last big one that the Elvish army would have to cross before getting to the village. The rest of the path would keep them under a thick canopy of trees. Just as Colton had predicted, they crossed where the meadow was narrowest. Betsam watched in anticipation as the army approached the point where they would spring their trap. Once the army arrived in the right spot, Arroweye shot an arrow in a high arch. It was too dark to see it fly, but after a moment there was an explosion in front of the army, which immediately stopped and pulled out their weapons. Then everyone watched a small series of explosions move around the army, followed by sections of a 15-foot wall flipping up out of the grass to form a wall around the army. The wall was just made of sticks with leaves attached to one side to make a flat surface. But that surface was painted to look just like thick stone, Rose's magic giving it that effect. Also, Lloyd's remaining locks with his sealing magic gave the wall added strength. Hopefully Lloyd and the others got the gate in the back shut and locked, trapping the entire army inside their improvised prison. Still, he knew those walls wouldn't hold those elves long, but Colton had said it only needed to hold them long enough. Betsam saw his friend walk up to the wall and then stand there with his head lowered in concentration. Looking up, he was amazed to see the stars begin to move above him as time outside the meadow began to speed up. Betsam and his friends gathered from their various positions around Colton with their weapons drawn, ready to do what they could to buy him the needed time. Already the wall was starting to fail. The horizon was beginning to brighten when they heard the crash as a section of wall to the rear collapsed. He could see elves coming around the side towards them with weapons out, but before they could reach them, the section right in front of them collapsed, spilling out a horde of elves. Betsam and the others all tensed and raised their weapons, but just before the fighting started, Colton shouted, "Stop!" At his command, all the elves doubled over in pain as a ray from the rising sun hit them. Shadow Elves were called so because they were banned from sunlight. Miraculously, the point of sunlight immediately went back down below the horizon. What was Colton doing? All he had to do was finish speeding up time and the sun would wipe the whole army out. But now he was holding the sun back an instant before sunrise. Colton began speaking with a loud voice that he must have been using magic to make loud enough for the whole army to hear. "If anyone moves toward us or the forest, the sun will rise immediately. I want to speak to your leader. I assume that would be Kelsion." "Colton." An angry, elvish accented voice spoke as an older elf approached. "Kelsion. Good to see you again. You're aging well." "And you seem to be aging the wrong way once again," the elf responded coldly. "You know me, I do so dislike being predictable. So, what is your intention towards my village?" "This village is in elvish lands, we intend to remove it. This is Belenor's land, and we are here with his permission. You can ask him if you ever get to the village, but it won't be today. He sent us to tell you to go home." Betsam noticed expressions of fear cross the faces of some of the Shadow Elves. Belenor might be ancient even by elvish standards, but he was feared. Kelsion, however, didn't even blink. "Belenor sent a group of children to stop my army." Colton smiled. "Just call us the Nosepicker Brigade, and you may have missed the fact that we did stop you." "Hey!" Arroweye started to protest Colton's name for them, but Betsam cut it short with a quick elbow to his ribs. "So," Colton continued, "here is the plan. You leave and don't ever come back, and we let your army live. We can leave, but we both know the time will come that neither you nor Belenor will be here to protect the village." "No problem," Colton said. "That's what the Nosepicker Brigade is for." Betsam landed another elbow to Arroweye's ribs before the boy could start another protest. "He's making us look like little kids," Arroweye quietly protested. "He's doing it on purpose. He's making them underestimate us and attacking their pride so he can manipulate them easier." "How's this?" Colton continued. "A duel, single combat, winner takes all. If you win you can go burn the village down. If Betsam wins you leave and never come back." "Wait, what?" Betsam asked in panic. Colton ignored him and stretched out his hand, and in a flash of light a sword appeared in it. "If you agree, swear it by the sword honor, then we can get started." The elvish leader stared at Betsam. He felt absolute terror under his gaze. What was Colton thinking? He was betting the lives of everyone on him beating an elvish general. "Come on, you're not going to let a 10-year-old human kid, whose voice hasn't even started to change yet, keep you from your date with mass murder, are you?" Kelsion stepped forward and wrapped his hand around the blade and said, "I agree." "Great, you have 1 minute to prepare," Colton said and walked back to his friends. "Are you crazy?" Betsam asked as soon as Colton was back with him. "Don't worry, you got this, just make sure he yields, don't kill him." "Don't kill him? How do I keep him from killing me?" Colton put his hand on Betsam's sickle, and he heard his friend speak to the magic entity called memory. Just the training memories and reflexes. He also heard the Fielas respond, "Very well." Before he could ask what they were talking about, Betsam felt a wave of magic come over him. With it came memories he was certain weren't his, memories of weapons practice in woods with an elf he didn't recognize. "What did you do?" he asked Colton. "Gave you about 150 years of weapons mastery training and reflexes from the best weapons master I ever met. Now you best get out there, and remember, I would never put the lives of everyone I love in your hands if I had the slightest doubt in you. Just remember not to kill him." "Why not?" "Because the day will come that you will fight alongside Kelsion and save us all." "Why me, why not you? You saw me earlier, who I am deep down, a scared boy hiding under a bush while my friends were about to die. You saved us. You saw what time, experience and growth did for me. It took me decades and powers beyond reason for me to tame those weaknesses. You have gained more bravery and leadership skill in your first 10 years of life than I did in my first 100. It was you that really saved us, and it is you that will continue to do so. Now go, he's waiting, and listen to Memory, she'll give you what help she can. Betsam looked to where Kelsion waited. The elf just stared at him. He began walking towards him. He stopped a few paces away and assumed a defensive position. After staring at him for a few moments, Kelsion spoke. First I kill you, then your friends, and then every last person in your village. Betsam didn't even have time to get angry at the statement. Kelsion was on him suddenly with a drawn sword, bringing it down on him. He just had time to half dodge, half deflect the attack with his sickle. He tried to take a swipe at the back of the elf's legs, but he was too quick and stepped away. At first Kelsion tried to use his strength to overpower the young boy, but Betsam used his small size and speed to deflect and avoid every blow. Betsam knew he was fighting beyond his abilities, but the skills that Memory had given him seemed as much a part of him as his own skills did. Dodge left, a voice in his head said. He had been about to dodge to the right, but followed Memory's advice and just barely dodged the feint Kelsion had almost tricked him with. How was he going to win this with both of them alive? How would he ever get a 400-year-old elf to yield to a 10-year-old boy? You are skilled, the elf finally admitted. How did a human so young gain such skills? Betsam thought hard. What could he say to end this fight without either one of them dying? The elves had shown fear at the names of both Bellinor and Colton. Maybe he could use that. We've all been taught to fight since we were old enough to hold a weapon. With Bellinor's teachings and Colton's powers over time, are you really surprised? Do you really attack villages you know so little about? Beginning to feel more confident in his new skills, Betsam began attacking instead of just defending. The Shadow Elf began to look worried. The elf seemed to be slowing down, and he realized the elf was running out of magic. He, on the other hand, had built up quite a bit as he had been fighting. Using a speed burst, he got his chain wrapped around the elf's sword and pulled it free from his hands. Then with another pull he wrapped his chain around his opponent's legs, with the point if the sickle planted deep in the leg muscle. Snatching up the elf's sword, he stepped up, used the last bit of his chain to bind his arms, and put the sword to Kelsion's throat. With this sword at your throat, I declare you to be dead. Can you deny my victory? Kelsion stared at him for a long moment, possibly hoping Betsam would kill him rather than force him to admit defeat to a boy so young. Finally, his face filled with resignation, and he said, I concede. I have lost. And you will honor your oath? Betsam asked. He has to. We swore the oaths on the sword of honor. We both must keep our side. It was Colton. He and the others had come up. Betsam began to free Kelsion from the chains. Where did that sword come from, and where did it go? He just noticed Colton was no longer holding the sword. I called it. Its current owner gave me permission to summon it when I need it. Now give me a moment to return us to the proper time. Betsam looked up and saw the sky darken and the stars move backwards. He couldn't help but ask, couldn't you take us back further, before Vali died? Colton looked pained as he shook his head. I can only go back to the point I pulled this meadow from regular time. To go back any further would mean there would be two of us existing in the same time. That is beyond my abilities to do. In moments they were back to the time when they had sprung the trap. Kelsion ordered the Shadow Elves to withdraw. As they watched them withdraw, Rose asked, what do we do now? Go back to the village and tell them what happened. Yes, about that, Colton said reluctantly. Nobody can know about me, the plan requires it. You mean we have to keep it a secret? Tulsimth asked incredulously. No, I mean no one can know, not even me, he said, as he threw a handful of his sleep powder into the faces of Lloyd, Rose, Arroweye, and Tulsimth. What are you doing? Betsam exclaimed as his friends collapsed to the ground, a familiar snore starting at once. Another war of destruction is coming. If it comes at the wrong time, we will lose it. The only way to make sure it happens as it should is for no one, especially me, to know about it. Why? Because he is weak, as you saw earlier, a voice boomed. Betsam spun around to see a monster right out of his childhood nightmares. It was a large older man with long bone spikes growing out of his arms and lifeless yellow eyes. He had only heard descriptions of the undead Lich Lords, but knew this was one of them. Colton didn't even flinch, he just looked over and said, "Hi Thodine." The monster looked Betsam up and down and said, "You know I prefer Lich El now. So, this is the boy you chose to save the world, not much to look at, is he? Neither was your Almus Aguarius, but I'm sure that changed once you got your bony claws on him, nearly destroying the plan in the process it seems. I had to improvise a little. You're an idiot. If I didn't need you, I'd feed you to Lady Alexia." This was Lich El, the leader of the Lich Lords, said to be one of the most powerful beings on all Mundial, and his best friend just called him an idiot and threatened him. "What are you going to do, and why is he here?" Betsam asked timidly. "I was here in case you failed, and to loan my friend a sword," Lich El said, gesturing to the sword of honor strapped to his side. "Killing those elves wouldn't have been as bad as losing the village, but it worked out," Colton said. "He could have stopped that whole army by himself." Lich El smiled an evil smile and responded, with a wave of my hand. Colton continued, "And we then would have been short one army later, when we needed it most. With people like Lich El and Lady Alexia, larger armies only mean more deaths. While my undead friend might disagree, I think the fewer the deaths, the better. So as far as what we are going to do now, Lich El here is going to leave, then I need to alter some memories, lastly my own. I hope you will let me do yours too. I get a choice. This is why I can't know who I am or what's coming. Even though I know what I should do, I can't always bring myself to do it. You are my best friend, and even though I shouldn't give you a choice, I can't tolerate the thought of forcing you. As my undead friend here said, I'm weak. Although I hope it's in a good way." Lich El added, "If you keep your memories as they are, you will have to do so alone. But if you give them up, then the time will come when they will be restored." Betsam looked at the Lich, just to forget ever seeing this creature would make it worth agreeing. Betsam thought long and hard. Despite all he had seen this night, he realized he still trusted Colton. He had saved them, and the emotions he had seen from him had been real. Then a thought came to him, and he directed his thoughts to the fielas in his hands. "Who controls altering memories, you or Colton?" Betsam asked. The answer came to his mind, "The ability is mine, but it is the person who holds me who controls it, and supplies the magic. That is why Colton had to touch me, when he had me give you those memories of weapons training and those skills. And yes, to your next question, as long as you hold me and he doesn't, you have complete control of my powers." "Can I trust him?" Betsam asked. "His desire to save the future, and his friendship to you and the others is real. I agree that the future would be safer if none knew his real identity." Betsam thought on this a moment, then he asked, "The memories you gave me are real memories from someone. How could you give me someone else's memories?" "When someone touches me, their mind is open to me. So, I can give those memories to another or create false memories and hide real ones," Memory answered. "Give me Colton's memories, all of them," Betsam answered, putting magic into the fielas. He regretted it immediately. Colton was right, some memories really are best left forgotten. Luckily, he still held memory and was able to banish those unwanted memories. Then he came to understand. He saw his friend as Colton saw himself. He understood what he was doing and saw how much he cared. He saw the future and what was coming. He felt like screaming, and perhaps he did. At some point he must have collapsed, because he returned to his senses, laying on the ground with Colton kneeling next to him, calling his name with a tone of concern. "Please tell me you didn't just do what I think you did." Betsam looked up at his friend, who he now knew far better than he ever wanted to know anyone. Even though he knew the answer, he still had to ask, "So, you're my great-grandfather?" Colton sighed and responded, "Yep, you did exactly what I was afraid you had done. Yes, part of the reason I helped this village during the War of Destruction was I had fallen in love. I made my home here, and raised a family. So now what?" Betsam could see all the possible futures that Colton had investigated, and tears came to his eyes when he realized the choices that had to be made. Finally he answered, "You're right, we both would mess things up if we keep our memories of you being the Time Mage. but I get to be the one that changes them. What memories do you intend to give yourself and your friends? Lich El asked. As close to the truth as I can. I will just transfer the reason for our survival to memory and leave Colton's abilities and identity out of it. I can make it seem that Kelsion had the Sword of Honor. I'm sure Bellinor will know different, but he will go along with it. Now if the undead monster will leave us, I can get started before the help we sent for arrives. You are sounding disturbingly like your great-grandfather, Lich El murmured as he turned and began walking away. You just want to keep the Fielas and your new fighting skills, Colton said with a mischievous grin once the two boys were alone. Downright I do. Maybe you'll save a few lives along the way with them. Also by Mark Van Pelt. Excerpt from Lich El, The Lich Lord Wars Book 1. Almus sat up and looked in the direction from which the arrow had come. Coming out of the woods was a man armed with a bow and the Aguarius crest on his tunic. It was one of his father's scouts, but something was wrong. Even from this distance he could tell his skin was pale and dry. He could also see running up both arms what looked like spikes. The most eerie thing was his face. It was completely emotionless, blank, like there weren't any thoughts or feelings behind eyes that appeared devoid of life. All those years of his father, telling stories of battles against the undead, could never have prepared Almus for meeting his first revenant. Revenants were completely lifeless, which meant there was a Lich Lord in the forest controlling it, and most likely more of them. This one was reloading his bow and Almus was just sitting there, completely unable to will his body to move from fear. The revenant pulled back the arrow and Almus was hit hard with the realization that he was about to die. Mathan's Flight. Fate's Foe Series Book 1. Mathan is a successful businessman thanks in no small part to a magical crest he wears around his neck that gives him glimpses into the future. His life is turned upside down when one of these glimpses shows him someone destined to become the worst and most evil tyrant the world will ever know, and shows him this person in the form of a small 8-year-old boy who just attempted to pick his pocket. Acknowledgements. Time Mage. Not only is this the longest short story I've written, but I set a personal speed record in writing it. For that I have to give thanks to the awesome kids in the Sunday School Class 1 teach who helped me define characters, helped me polish up my early drafts and helped pick the ending. It was Trayson Peterson who first put the idea of a time mage in my head. That idea wasted no time on invading and nearly taking over my entire fictional universe, until Trayson helped me define the character until we came up with the character Colton you saw in the story. Additional help with the story and characters came from his classmates, Trevor Webb, Sarah Kuczynski, Ezra Shimazaki, Michael England and Bridger Beaton. This story is for you guys. About the author. Growing up in Bay Point, California, Mark spent much of his time creating and exploring worlds and stories. He finally realized that once he got the stories written down, they stopped haunting his sleeping and waking dreams. So he started writing them down. He writes the kind of stories that he enjoys, which are stories about families written for families. Mark currently lives in northern Utah with his wife and kids.